Amid Aston Martin Aramco Formula One team's massive ambition to return as a top contender in Formula One, the team is actually facing a harsh reality far more complicated than simply poor results on track. After spending months haunted by extreme vibrations that damaged the battery and made the car nearly impossible to control, a small ray of hope finally appeared at the 2026 Miami Grand Prix. But just when everyone thought their biggest problems were finally over, Fernando Alonso revealed a shocking new issue that now seems even more concerning than before. Is this the beginning of Aston Martin's comeback? Or a sign that their 2026 season has already completely fallen apart? Let's discuss it. The Miami Grand Prix was supposed to be the turning point for Aston Martin. For the first time during the 2026 season, both of their cars finally managed to complete an entire race weekend without suffering any major mechanical failures. The extreme vibrations that had previously plagued the AMR26 were finally eliminated. The same issue that caused Alonso's hands and feet to go numb in China, destroyed batteries, and led to several DNFs was no longer appearing. Alonso himself confirmed after the race that the vibration problem was truly gone. There were no more major issues like the ones they experienced earlier in the season. For Aston Martin, this was not just a small improvement. It was the first step in what would be a very long and difficult journey. But that optimism did not last long. When asked about the car's performance in Miami, Alonso instead revealed a new problem that immediately changed the atmosphere inside the team. According to Alonso, the team's biggest issue is no longer the engine, but the gearbox, which felt extremely strange throughout the entire weekend. He explained that both downshifts and upshifts felt abnormal and unpredictable. Alonso even admitted that he never truly felt in control of the car while driving on track. Even more worrying, Alonso openly stated that fixing the gearbox has now become the team's #1 priority before the Canadian Grand Prix. In modern Formula One, a gearbox is far more than just a component for changing gears. Every aspect of braking, acceleration, and overall car stability depends on precise gearbox synchronization. When a driver brakes hard approaching a corner, the downshift must happen at exactly the right moment with consistent response. If the shift happens too quickly, the car loses momentum. If it happens too slowly, the car's balance can be compromised. And if the shifts feel rough or unstable, the rear wheels can lock up, potentially causing the driver to lose control. That is exactly what Alonso is currently experiencing. The biggest issue is not just the lack of performance, but the loss of driver confidence in the car itself. In Formula One, once a driver no longer trusts the car's behaviour entering or exiting corners, lap times immediately collapse. It does not matter how strong the aerodynamic upgrades are. Lost confidence cannot simply be fixed with extra downforce. The root of Aston Martin's gearbox problems actually comes from a major decision the team made before the season even began. For the first time, Aston Martin decided to build their own gearbox after separating from the Mercedes-Benz rear-end system they had used for years as a customer team. Once the full factory partnership with Honda began, Aston Martin lost access to Mercedes' gearbox, rear suspension, and entire rear-end package. That meant the entire system had to be designed completely from scratch, and the challenge turned out to be far more difficult than expected. The 2026 Formula One gearbox is significantly more complex than previous generations because the MGU-K system now produces and regenerates far greater levels of power. The torque load entering the gearbox has increased dramatically, and everything must be processed within milliseconds. The problem is that Aston Martin's transmission department is still relatively new to handling systems this advanced. The result is a gearbox that, according to Alonso, sometimes works normally and sometimes does not. This problem becomes even more frightening because the next race is the Canadian Grand Prix at the Gilles Villeneuve circuit, one of the heaviest braking tracks on the entire Formula One calendar. The Montreal circuit is filled with long straights that are immediately followed by extreme braking zones into slow corners and tight chicanes. The L'Épingle hairpin, for example, forces the cars to slow down from over 300 km per hour to less than 80 km per hour in just a few seconds. Situations like that require multiple rapid downshifts in succession, and right now, that is Aston Martin's worst area. If the gear shifts remain inconsistent, Alonso will have to choose between slowing down to keep the car stable or continuing to push and risking a spin or even a crash into the wall. And the problems do not stop there. The 2026 Canadian Grand Prix will use the sprint weekend format. That means Alonso will have only one free practice session before sprint qualifying begins. Just one session to find out whether the gearbox fix developed by Honda in Sakura has actually worked or not. If the solution fails, Aston Martin will have almost no time to make major changes before the car is thrown straight into competitive sessions. Behind all these problems, however, lies a much deeper story about how the AMR26 project was built. On paper, Aston Martin's full partnership with Honda looked like a massive step toward the future. They joined forces with the same manufacturer that previously helped Red Bull Racing dominate Formula One and win 4 consecutive world championships. But the reality behind the scenes has turned out to be far more complicated. When Honda temporarily left Formula One at the end of 2020, many of their best engineers were reassigned to other projects. By the time Honda decided to return, much of this complex project was being handled by second-tier engineering teams. As a result, there is now a huge gap between expectations and the reality seen on track. The situation has reportedly been made worse by the integration process between Aston Martin and Honda, which allegedly has not worked perfectly from the very beginning. Some reports even claim that the early working relationship between Aston Martin CEO Andy Cowell and Honda was not strong enough to build ideal technical coordination. As a result, many developments were carried out in parallel rather than being fully integrated. When Adrian Newey arrived at Aston Martin, he reportedly found a team still going through a major transition period. The organisational structure was expanding rapidly, but the working culture and internal stability were still far from fully mature. Ironically, the AMR26 itself is said to feature an extremely aggressive and innovative design. From radical aerodynamic concepts to the use of multi-link suspension on both sides of the car. Unfortunately, revolutionary designs require time, resources, and technical stability, all of which Aston Martin still does not fully possess at the moment. That is why the car they introduced since Australia continues to create consequences they are still dealing with today. Interestingly, Alonso appears remarkably calm in the middle of all this. After Miami, he said that he was at peace with Aston Martin's current situation. That statement sounded strange considering he started near the back, finished far outside the points, and was still battling gearbox problems. However, Alonso seems to understand that this project truly requires a long-term process. He experienced a similar situation during his years with McLaren Honda. He knows exactly what it feels like to rebuild a power unit project from the ground up. Alonso believes Aston Martin is currently in that phase. Are these small steps forward actually real progress, or is Aston Martin still trapped at the beginning of a much longer crisis? Write your opinion in the comments below,